Hello there. This is Jason. This is Jason Eagle, your natural health authority, with another Healing Matters podcast. And today we're going to talk about food quality. Food quality. Some of the buzz terms would be organic or traditional or grass-fed, farm-raised, cage-free, pasture-raised, all of these different things. What wildcrafted, what do they mean? And what do I mean by food quality? And so, Jason Eagle, your natural health authority. You can find me on Facebook. That's Strategic Healing. You can find me on YouTube, Jason Eagle QRA. On all podcasts, it's Healing Matters, all one word. So, food quality. Your best quality food would be food that you would actually grow yourself. And if you knew what you're doing, you did it right. Many people feel that organic is the best thing. No, organic maybe, but doubtful, especially American organic. And I can tell you the best food that I've ever found in the world, besides the food that I grow myself, and that includes animals. So if you don't know, you can check me out on my Instagram or Facebook or whatever. I have a farm. Me and my family have a farm, and it's not just me, it takes all of us to do it. And we have cows, we have sheep, we've had it all. We don't raise pigs anymore, but we do have a person raise pigs for us to our specifications. We have chicken, turkey, geese. I've done it all, and I do the butchering myself. We do the raising. We feed them very differently. We've put a lot of research into this, and we've developed a method that provides the best of the best. Also, plants. I'm not just an animal person, but I am an omnivorian person. And I think when people say, is a plant-based better or a vegan better or, carnivore or an omnivorian or whatever, even the people that eat animals, it's the same thing as plants, which is it depends upon how you raise them. And if you don't raise them correctly, so even the cholesterol and all of the other types of things, when you say, well, meat is bad, meat what meat are you testing? Are you testing just conventionally grown, raised? And when I get into talking about beef and all this other stuff, which type of animal, and then even wild harvested in terms of hunting. I live here in Michigan, and you can get an animal that eats in the wild. And what are those like? And some of it also depends upon where you live. So, but in any case, the difference is, like I said, also the plants. We have a huge garden, and I've raised it all. I'm really good at potatoes, really good at garlic, really good at my favorite, which is bitter melon. I got a lot of the Asians, and that's the thing is I've also eaten in a very different way. I eat rotationally, and I do things from year to year. And I also do intermittent fasting, and so sometimes too this is what you don't eat and when you don't eat and when you eat and what type of food that you eat. But we're getting far here, which is quality. It has to do with how is it raised. So let me say, again, here in America we think organic would be the best. Well, let's talk about what organic really means, especially when it has that label on it, or it has that term organic, which is you have to understand, here in America, everything is legal. And legal can be in fact, legal is misleading. It's not what you think it says. And the words have been hijacked, and you have to have legal terms. And you can't even say legal terms, especially if you're selling in an open market, if you're selling in providing, or anyone that grows anything and then wants to then have it labeled. When you go into labeling and barcode and all this other stuff. So let's talk about, the different things. Okay, let's say organic. So we're talking about vegetables now. Let's focus on plants. Okay, plants grow in the ground, right? Plants grow from sunshine. Plants also have to be watered. Plants also grow in soil. So the difference in a conventionally grown thing, especially in modern age thing, you have plants. So let's say broccoli, okay? Broccoli, and I've actually been to many broccoli fields out where a lot of them are grown out in California. And I've been on that dirt, and I can tell you it is sand. So California, if you remember that movie, The Grapes of Wrath, was a beautiful. California actually was an ancient sea, and California was had all kinds of different ecosystems. And when it hadn't been farmed on, and people didn't rape it and take everything away from it and put nothing back into it, and then also put chemicals in it and all this other stuff, what has happened to the land? It is disgusting. And the only way to get a piece of broccoli to grow nowadays is you have to pump fertilizer into it. And the standard fertilizer, what's called NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And so what these things are is those are just three things of what we think grows a plant. But in actuality, it is billions untold, and there's things that you can't even measure. You don't even know. And you don't have to figure that out if you just put it in good land. And the land has to have the minerals put back in. So the number one thing that is missing in our plants are minerals. Now we get into, but there's a whole bunch of there's other ecosystems in terms of when you've killed everything in the land, and it's basically there are no biodiversity in terms of there's no little microorganisms, there's no mushrooms growing in there, and it's dependent upon, basically it's life support. Think about a person that is in a coma. Like they have to be breathed for and fed and pooped and everything. And it's artificial life support. So standard food is literally artificial life support. Okay? And what organic really means is that essentially you just don't put the chemicals on it for 5 years. And it has to be done that way for 5 years. And then you can label it what's called organic. Now, let's say you go to these broccoli farms. If all you did was just not put chemicals on it, would be artificial fertilizers as well as pesticides, insecticides, herbicides, three of the sides, which is, do you want to kill the weeds? Do I want to kill the insects? And pesticides and insecticides are essentially the same thing. But what they do is they're just like an antibiotic. So what people find with humans, we've done the same thing. So the same thing that's going on in the planet is the same thing that's going on inside your body. And your gut is the soil. And if you've basically just napalmed it, then what happens is you grow the superbugs. And antibiotics don't work anymore. That's why they had to develop. Then we have another thing, which is we call GMOs. Genetically modified, and they've modified them to do all kinds of things. Number one, they've modified so that you can put a poison on them and they don't die from the poison. You can put and that poison would be something that would be an herbicide, which is so you get rid of its competition, so you don't have to physically weed it. Okay. And then the other thing, they do the GMOs to help it to actually select for a particular type of breeding, but it's been inbred. Okay, so it's kind of like breeding in the wrong family and breeding different things together that you don't know what they're going to do. And then they've also bred it for insects. And then so that you can put insecticides on it and that it doesn't die from that poison. So basically you've created this super being, kind of like a super soldier, and that's your broccoli. And you think you're going to get nutrition out of that? You think you're going to eat? So organic is not, again, you don't have to put any minerals back in it whatsoever. And a lot of the standard organic or the most popular, the big box store organic stuff, if you go to where the farms are, it's almost no different than when they were conventional. And in fact, when you go into a grocery store, a lot of times you'll look at what used to be, now they've gotten a lot better since Whole Foods and other things, but even that is not what you think it is. But let's say a Kroger's 5 years ago. You looked at the organic and go, I want to pick the organic broccoli. And then you look at the other stuff. And the huge difference between the organic stuff, it looked pathetic. Not only did it not, the other stuff looked great, right? But it was wilty and junky and it wasn't good food. It really was not. So the difference is do they put the mineral? So now we get into what some of the highest quality stuff is biodynamic, and it literally meaning you're treating the biology. So good farmers farm the soil rather than the plant. You take care, say, and also good healthy people. So this is why we talk about probiotics in your gut. We talk about the microbiome. These are these buzzwords, okay? The microbiome essentially just means good soil in your gut. The microbiome of plants and animals is good soil that they live off of, okay? So you go back to the old ways of which it used to be, and that's one of my also recommendations is some of the best food, especially vegetables, that you can ever find is out of this country and in places that are small, or what you would almost call like third world. Some of the best vegetables I've ever eaten would be, Dominican Republic, these island places, these, volcanic lava islands, Hawaii, Cuba, if you could get to it, Cancun. These are the type of places. Belize, Jamaica. These are spectacular stuff. Not only is the fruit awesome, and part of it is since they're so small, they're still done by people and they're still done by hand. And so if you go on vacation in these places, other places in Asia and Malaysia and the Philippines and all these places. So let's say you're on vacation in Cancun or Belize or something like that, and you go to the local market and it kind of stinks a little bit and these people look like they're poor. They're not, and who cares if they are? That's great, because what it means is they still have to face market issues, which is if it looks like junk, you're not going to buy it. And usually when they go into market, they've picked it exactly that day. So we think even here, like going to the farmer's market, which is good, farmer's market here in Michigan or Iowa or any place in the state, a lot of times they haven't rebuilt. They have to rebuild their soil. Unless they know what they're doing, they've got to doctor their soil and fix it. Whereas in places like Cancun, Belize, and stuff like that, they don't have to fix it because they've always done the same, which is they raised some animals, they put the manure on it, they picked it by hand, they watered it by hand. They're not using a GMO seed, they're not using insecticides, pesticides, they're not using false fertilizers. They've never over farmed it. They didn't use a bunch of equipment, so they haven't smashed it down. That's what's happening here in America. It's these great big huge tractors that just, and then you go back to even some of the old ways. Like if you read in the Bible when it talks about how God said to the Jews, to the Hebrews, and just anyone who's just not an idiot, there was the law of sevens, which is you farm it for a period of time, and then there were also multiple times. You do this for 2 to 3 years, and then you stop it, and then either you rotate it, instead of growing your wheat in the same thing again or your soybeans in the same thing, you do it for a number of years, and then you maybe rotate it, and then now let's move to beans. And can you do that a number of years? And then for like every 7 years, you don't do anything at all. You basically let it go fallow. And people go, well, that's bad business. I'm losing money on it. No, because you got to give it time to check up. You're actually investing. And so letting something rest. So even with our body, that's what fasting is. That's what, basically allowing things to rest, to catch up. And, so there's these laws that were not just these Levitical type of biblicals. They were smart science, which is it allows these things. So, you go to these places, Amish grown, Mennonite grown food, they still do these things. They still go out and they harvest the manure and they put it out on there. There's other different types of minerals, like we use a volcanic mineral called azomite, which is basically this dirt from out in Arizona. It's an old ancient seabed, and there's different stuff like that. But kelp, which is, we're here in Michigan, so you don't have iodine, and so where's iodine come from? It comes from seaweed. So we put kelp and all kinds. So we put stuff into it, and that goes into the plants. Okay, so that's better than organic. I would much prefer a person who does that type of things and then uses a little bit of maybe even the chemicals or the fertilizers That's not a big deal. Because see, the thing is people go, well, what about these things that poison the land? Here's the most amazing beauty science is, I don't care how screwed up the land is if you put natural, again, I don't care how screwed up your gut is if you put the probiotics, the living things back in it, they will fix it for you. And what they do is, so the land can even be unpoisoned and un-GMO'd. You can have plants. So by putting the minerals and all of these different things that are essentially like computer chips, how do you decode, how do you debug your computer? That's essentially what the body is. That's essentially what the earth is. It's a living biodynamic computer with all these living things that are also our little computers. And so, like your computer, sometimes you get a virus, sometimes you get a malware, sometimes you get a bug, and you have to have an upgrade, which means it's the same thing with our body. Sometimes we have to get sick from it, and then we have to let the immune system kick in and figure out what to do about it. And then what it does is that then it shares the actual cure. It shares, so when our computer gets fixed, I'm using this as an analogy because it's the same thing in our body as it is in the earth. So by putting, again, you think, well, the genetics, well, you've screwed up the genetic, which is that the DNA of your plants or your animals. How do we fix that? You just bring it back to nature. You bring the nutrients back in. So a good thing like what we do on our garden too is we bring in leaf litter. We bring in, basically we have people that are the road crews that are doing wood chipping on the roads. And these are old growth trees. So when the guys are clearing those trees on the road and then they have to chip it up and all the leaves, again, these are things that have never been pesticided. These are plants that have very, very deep roots. And so when you go out into the forest, how does the forest fertilize itself? The leaves fall down and they decompose. And the leaves are basically, especially their deep trees like oak trees and sycamore and all this other stuff, this wild stuff, they have very, very, and then the weeds too. They have like dandelion weeds and burdock weeds. So sometimes too, allowing the weeds to grow then starts to, if you got a really bad piece of property, you let the weeds grow and you'll see some years it goes to this, it goes to this. And what the weeds do is they literally go deep down and start pulling the minerals up. And they're very smart. They will bring the minerals. And if you understand the science about what they've discovered with what's called the mycelial network. Mycelial network are the mushrooms. That's what a mushroom is the mycelial network. And when you look at the mycelium, which is all living ground, if you look at it under a microscope, yes, plant hemp. Hemp is also another thing. Hemp fixes. Some guy here on my Facebook, they found out that if you had a piece of property, so let's say it's a Superfund site and it's completely toxic because they dumped all kinds of stuff, mercury and even radioactive. So let's say Chernobyl, if they dropped hemp seeds, and I'm not talking smoking cannabis, I'm talking about the hemp where we get CBD from, but hemp is also what we made. It's what the Declaration of Independence is printed on. It's what the sails were made out of. It's what all this stuff is it's a fiber. Hemp is, we're also using it for pain and everything, but it's a food. That's what hemp seeds come from, like hemp seed hearts. Perfect protein, 80% protein, high essential fatty acids. It's food. But what it does is the hemp seeds will literally take plutonium and uranium and uranium-28 and the really dangerous stuff. And what it does, and it does the same thing for the GMOs. This is what I'm kind of getting around to what happens in your garden or happens in these really poison, and it doesn't take 100 years to do it. It does it in a year. It does it extremely quickly. Certain plants are able to fix the problem, and just like they're finding their people go, oh my God, like what are we gonna do all but this toxic oil sludge? There's mushrooms, there is kelp, there is other different types of living form, especially the mushrooms, that eat oil, that eat toxic sludge and then turn it into pure oxygen and pure nutrients, and they alchemically do this magic processes where they take a poison and then turn it into something that's good, right? So this is what I'm saying about the land is really, really smart farming practices is not this organic science. What it is it's back to nature, and it's back to the old ways of like the Amish and the Mennonite and the poor Belizeans and the Jamaicans, and this stuff is because, number one, God bless them, they were too poor to join the real world. Thank God, because the real world was wrong. So now let's get back into when we're talking about, what is the best food? It's definitely not necessarily organic, although you can have a company that does it organic and then does it biodynamically too. Permaculture is another word that's used in the farming thing, and that is for both animals as well as plants, which is respecting the land and letting it teach you and then using the problem to become the solution. It's the old ways. And it's this beautiful science that actually creates wonderful quality food, okay? So now we get into, let's say, animals in terms of what's the difference, because it had a lot of, what about eggs, okay? Are eggs good? Well, you can take the so is it what's called saturated fat, unsaturated fat, and yes, there's some bad fat, but the remarkable thing is let's say we take eggs, or let's say even take pork, okay? Let's go back to eggs. So chickens that are raised and now we get into these legal terms. When you go to the store and you go, I want to buy the best eggs, when they said cage free, because people learned about the standard practice in terms of, for a long time, when you were buying eggs, these white eggs, these were chickens that were raised in cages in a building where the environment is controlled, but it's super hot, it's super stinky, and they're stacked on top of each other and they're pooping on each other. They're getting poop all over the place. That's why when people go, you got to really worry about these raw eggs because of salmonella. Salmonella comes from their poop. And how's the poop getting in an egg? Poop does not get in the egg because it doesn't get in past the eggshell unless the thing is just covered in poop, right? And very toxic poop, as well as, these animals are very, very sick. So that's where it gets the antibiotics. So then around came cage free, okay? And people had in their mind like it was, the chickens out there roaming and picking at the ground and in the sunshine and like, the beautiful farm picture that they showed. Lie, okay? Cage free legally, now there may be some companies where it is that, but that's not the legal term. What the legal term allowed for them to mislead you is what cage free means is they are still in a building. They are still standing on concrete. They are still covered up. They don't get sunshine. They don't get any grass. They're just not stacked on cages, okay? Still dirty, still mismanaged, still not right. And we get natural eggs, and God knows what that means. But I will tell you, the only one that means what you think it means, which is they're outside, now even is what's called pasture raised. So when you and they're the more expensive ones, pasture raised. Unless you buy an egg from me that I don't have no label on it, you can come by and look at the chickens and see how they're raised. And they're hand harvested, right? You stick your hand in there. It's not a machine, not a conveyor belt. Pasture raised are, chickens that are outside on the ground in sunshine. Now they can go inside and sleep inside, okay? But they're not separated from the environment, and the environment is healthy and clean. So now let's look at the egg. What's the quality? This whole show is about the quality. Go back to those old eggs that were stacked on top of each other, and you see, and again, they are also fed lots of grain. They're fed lots of soybeans, but it's soybeans that was ground up weeks or months ago that has started to oxidize, and then they have to put in. So even the food that you feed them is very, very contaminated, very, very bad. So they're not able to. So those eggs, if you were to look at the cholesterol in those eggs, it's very bad cholesterol. If you were to look at, and the ratio of the good to bad is very off, and there's high levels of possible salmonella and all kinds of other stuff. And they're, again, look at the yolk, they're just like pale. They're barely yellow. They don't taste much like an egg. Like a Denny's egg is not an egg. Okay? Now you go into a pasture raised or a farm raised egg like ours is, which is they're out there pecking, they're fed a little bit of stuff, but for the most part they're getting their own food. They're scraping and they're getting under the leaves and they're getting worms and bugs, and they eat lots of plants, they're eating lots of green stuff, they're eating seeds and all kinds of other stuff. Those yolks are orange. Sometimes our yolks are like pumpkin. And you can taste the difference. And if you measured the cholesterol on that, you would go, wow, like these are super great cholesterol in the perfect ratios. And then the nutrients and all this other stuff. So that's when you can say that's a healthy egg. So saying this, picking and choosing and saying all eggs are bad, or all meat is bad, or all meat is good. No, it's quality. And the quality has to do with how it's raised. Same thing with the pork. Okay, pork tends to be one of the more dangerous foods because they can get what's called trichinosis. They can get lots of parasites and stuff. But that's from these animals that are raised with just no land whatsoever. Okay, where they're just in mud and poop or in a building or something like that. So standard pork, yes, can be very dirty and doesn't have much of the good fat in it, and it tends to be very acidic and acid forming, these different types of things. But let's say a pig that is raised out in the wild, right, where they let them, like our pigs or a lot of the good pig farmers that you'll all over the country, is they just like they raise them in cows, which is they're out in the pasture. These pigs are fenced off, and they go out in the woods. So like the pigs that they raise to make pancetta or to make Iberico ham, the Spanish ham, is especially fed on acorns. Where do they get the acorns from? It's because they're living out in oak groves or pecan groves. And so they're living out in the wild and they're rooting and they're getting roots and all kinds, and you barely feed them, okay? Same thing with what's the difference between a grass-fed beef and a typical other, let's say, traditional, typical. So what's called feedlot beef is, so they may be out in the pasture when they're younger, okay? They may be out in a place where they can roam some land, okay? And maybe the farmer feeds them a little bit from time to time. But then we get into what's called standard, which is it's anywhere from the last 2 weeks to the last probably 2 months of their life. They're brought into what's called a feedlot. And that is just a corral that is just dirty, and it's dirt, and they're packed in like sardines, and they are fed nothing but corn and soybeans. But it's also corn and soybeans that's been turned, and they can make a ground up feed mix. So it's not raw, this stuff. What it is, so the other thing about animals is, and then people can go, was grain free is good? Well, that's a different thing too. So when you take corn or soybeans, okay, and when it goes into a silo, that's a raw corn kernel, or a raw, and it's uncracked and it's unbroken. If you took that corn, and corn has oil, and soybeans have high oil in it too, they have carbohydrates, they have protein, they have fat, okay? So the whole thing about nutrients, especially in a seed, is like a bottle. So let's say a pill bottle, as long as it's sealed, and especially many different nutrients, as long as it's protected from light. So Premier Research Labs, their supplements are bottled and packaged, in my opinion, the best way possible, because number one, these bottles that look black, they're not black. They're also actually what's called violet. They're a deep, deep purple. They had these manufactured for them at the Max Planck Institute, which is they're designed to block the nanometers of light, the wavelength spectrum that damages the oils, okay? And then they are put into the bottle, and not only are they sealed, all of the air is sucked out of them, and nitrogen is pumped into them, and then they are sealed. And they're double sealed, they have a foil seal, and then they also have a sealed top. So what that means is so the thing that damages food, and especially the oils, and makes it oxidize, and when things are oxidized, that's when they become damaging. They create what's called free radicals. And so the feedlot stuff is if they're eating, so let's say when you're feeding your dog food, your dried dog food, or cat food, or rabbit food, or horse food, or cow food, if it comes in a bag and it's been ground up, you don't know how long it's been sitting there. And for sure it's exposed to oxygen and exposed to light. And you've smelled the old cat food before. It smells rancid, right? Because the oils start to rancidify. And when it rancids, when it gets oxidized, then it becomes a damaging thing. So a lot of times the feedlot animals are eating poison foods in terms of even the grains, okay? So then again, feedlot is they are raised on poison foods, and it's just pure, they're basically fed Wonder Bread and Ho-Hos all day long, which fattens them up and makes them fattier, okay? And a fat carries flavor in meat, okay? But it's a toxic fat. So the fat that's a very high carbohydrate. So essentially you look at these animals, especially the cows, the feedlot cows, is they basically become diabetics. They become these extreme diabetics and put on lots of weight, and they can get sick, and these hormones. So not only can they be juiced up with actually hormones given the shots, that's why when people kind of go, I want to buy the hormone-free stuff. Well, there's hormones in the feed that they give them, okay? So feedlot, standard, typical animals that are raised are toxic and are a hormone storm, and they can be very unhealthy for you. And they really don't taste very good, right? They think that they're making it taste better by putting, letting the fat levels go high, but it's masking what really good is. So in beef or in lamb or this other stuff, really, and when you get lamb, okay, so let me say there's a lot of people that say, I don't like lamb because it has a gamey flavor. Goat or lamb in particular. Well, I will tell you what, our lamb, the raised that it's raised, everyone calls it sweet beef. It's rare to find a cut that even tastes like lamb, and we've gotten to the point where we even miss the taste of lamb because the way that it's raised. So let me tell you how we raise our animals, okay? So first of all, they are pasture raised. They are out there eating grass. And now we get into how many animals do you have? You have to have enough land for them, which is literally more than any factory would want to do because they think they're wasting it, right? So you have to have enough land so that they don't eat it all, okay? The most ideal is these animals that are done what's called rotational grazing, which is they don't put them in a huge field. What they do is they fence them off and they put them in separate paddocks, and they'll let them eat in this lane for a day, and then the next day they'll switch them over, a day or two, and then they'll switch them over to this one. And then as they go, they'll go to the end of the row, and then by the time they come back to the very first one, all of that grass has grown back, but it's not grown to its adult stage. It's grown to... So when you get into the science of a plant, the most ideal nutrition is not in its small grass stage, which is wheatgrass the healthiest? No, a microgreens, or even better, a plant that is in what's called its teenage stage. It's teenage stage, not when it becomes old and not when you think it's all tall and full of like seed pods and everything like that. No, it actually loses its most ideal nutrition. And so when you go back to the animals, so let's say the bison or the buffalo, where the buffalo roam, that was amazing what the Indians ate. If you saw what those buffalo did, is they massaged the land. They move, because this mimics how animals eat, which is they eat the grass at that most perfect state. They prefer the grass. And if you manage them that way, they keep the grass that way, which means it has the most nutrition. It has the most minerals. It stores the sun energy at its most prime level of photosynthesis, and so it has the highest level of chlorophyll. And so animals that eat these grasses, so people go into grass-fed, okay, that is the healthiest animal. That is the healthiest meat. But pure grass-fed tends to not have enough fat in it. And so it's too lean. And so you have to kind of put a lot more salt in it and flavor it. So what we found is we do give them a little bit of grain, but what we do is we give them this corn, and we give them whole corn and whole soybeans that are ground that day. We bought these grinders that they do this in Russia. So we bought some grinders that came from China and from Russia. Or was it Russia or either Yugoslavia or something like that. Okay. So what we do is we freshly grind, and our cows and our sheep, they're only getting a little bit, basically a little bit of grains that's freshly ground. And freshly ground means that until the day we ground it, it's like that sealed bottle. So whole corn and whole soybeans, the majority of it still has a skin on it, it has a husk on it, and so it's protected from oxygen. So the oils and the nutrients don't oxidize. And so when we feed them, it's freshly cracked that day. And so it has not had time to oxidize. We also add specific minerals for the animal. The sheep get a special mineral. They also get high levels, or not high levels, but perfect levels of the very trace elements, which is called selenium and copper and cobalt and magnesium and manganese and all of these other things. So they have their supplements. I treat people, I treat my animals that way. And so they're getting a little bit of this grain, which gives them a more fatty layer. And I do the butchering, so I see how much fat, and the fat to lean is perfect. You know, if you ever seen Kobe beef, there is some section of this stuff that is literally Kobe beef, so perfectly marbled, so absolutely glorious. But they're not fat. They're perfect. They just look perfect, and you can't see the ribs, but they're not fat, right? So same thing with the sheep and the cows. They're raised this way. Okay, and then they also get some hay, which we get some locally grown hay and stuff like that. Now, people go, well, are they GMO free or whatever? You don't need to do that, because if you provide the right minerals, what happens is your gut and the land fixes it. So the land will fix the grass. The land will fix the hay. Their bodies will fix the actual GMOs. So do we get a non-GMO corn or non-GMO soybean? No, we don't, because it's minimal. And in fact, but again, if you really understand what the body does, the body can heal anything if you give it, even stuff that has been damaged by man or poisoned or even genetically modified. These things can all be fixed by just providing the real nutrients of the world, okay? So that's why I say some of the best meat is going to be the Amish raised, Mennonite, okay? Or your local hunter. You know, you're talking about deer meat that gets processed. What are the deer? They're out there eating. Now, if you got deer that are, so some of these big trophy bucks that are living on these, you know, standard GMO farms, like you go to Michigan in areas where the biggest bucks are taken, they come from some of the areas where they're just eating. Those animals, even though they may be wild, they're not as healthy. You look at their fat, you look at their body, you test their meat for the mineralization. So what you find is the ones that are actually taken from the woods, that are living in the woods, animals that eat in the woods, plants that are grown in the woods. When we get into wildcrafted, the best plants that you can get are ones where people, and a lot of the supplement that come from premier research labs have been sourced from places like India and China, but it's not these huge factories. What they are is the guys that literally keep secret where these plants are grown. They go out in the forest. They either plant or they just find them in the forest. And so they're still wild grown, which means they have all of the nutrients. They have all of what the world, what the nature has fixed and made perfect. And man doesn't even need to figure out. That is the best food that you can get, whether it be plants or whether it be animals. And so again, I'd love to at some point even test well-grown animals, well-grown eggs, and say, okay, and go, look at the guys that are basically touting 100% plant-based, and say, well, what type of plants and what type of animals were you testing? What type of meat were you testing? If you're testing this junk that you just pull off the shelf, yeah, of course. But if you test this stuff, and if you test people that have been living on this stuff, what is that like? What do their bodies look like? And I think that we'll find even the plant-based thing, I'm not against it. It's a perfect tool. A meal is a tool. What you eat, when you eat, how you eat is a tool. Sometimes you need a screwdriver, sometimes you need a hammer. Sometimes you need to clean your arteries out, and sometimes you need to pack them. Sometimes you need to put some fat on, and sometimes you need to get rid of some fat. Sometimes you need to put some muscle on. So there's even, in terms of when people are working out, you need your carbohydrates. But what's the quality of the carbohydrates? What's the type of the quality? Is it, am I okay to just eat my candy bars? Or should I a really well-grown potato and rice and sweet potato and then well-grown fruit and stuff like that? Go natural for your sugar and your carbohydrates and things like that. And that makes a huge difference. So quality of food, again, it's not just one answer. There's so many factors that go into it. And you don't have to overthink it, is you just go back natural and you find the people that are growing it naturally. And don't be misled by, well, they're organic, that must be perfect. No, really question organic. So what have you done? And then sometimes too, the best food you can get is food that you can find and look at it and verify it. Go to that farm, go to those farmers market, go to their websites, these type of things, where be more responsible for your own food. And that will encourage more local growers. What grows is where you put your money. Where the money is put is what will grow. And that's the same thing in businesses. And so if people want this food to come back and you want food to be what you say it is then support it. So support people like me. You can go, I got a PayPal site or I've got a Patreon site. You can help us and stuff like that. But help yourself. Start learning these things. Start making better choices. And, Whole Foods is not the best choice. Aldi's is not the best choice. Okay? The best choice is local. The best choice is verified. And the best choice is the old ways. And the best choice is putting back in what you have taken out of nature, right? And it's as simple as putting the leaves back in, putting the manure back in, bringing even some things from far and wide that was not in there. Michigan was what developed the whole thyroid issue of putting iodine and salt, because we had such huge goiters because we're surrounded by so much fresh water that we've almost never had iodine, and you need iodine. And iodine's really only at the coast where the oceans are. And so the smart farmers brought in truckloads. What was the difference up in like northern Michigan where they grew lots of potatoes or sweet potatoes? The smart guys that had a train load full of seaweed that they harvested just from the beach, just throwing that stuff out. You go to a nice beach, somebody's out there every morning with a tractor getting all this seaweed. Well, that stuff gets shifted. That stuff can get shipped back to these different parts of the world. In particular, Michigan, those potatoes, those corn, those vegetables, those cucumbers, oh my God, those grapes, amazing. They have everything. And so there's a smart way to do it. And like I said, even the animals, there's a smart way. And the smart way is you got to take some of what's nature, you got to take some of what man, you have to take some of what's technology, and you have to take some of what's not technology and blend them together, and you come up with this beautiful hybrid of the best, of take some of the old, take some of the new, and take some of the basically wild, and just let them figure out. Our animals, we don't have any antibiotics, we don't give them any shots. We don't give them even, like the standard sheep, they say, well, you better give them, they get parasites, they get worms. Yeah, they do if you don't feed them right. And if you don't give them the right minerals, and so if they're sick and they don't have the right immune system, they will catch stuff. Our animals don't catch stuff. And when we do, we treat them with garlic, we treat them with other stuff. We don't put them on antibiotics, and basically we are our own vet, but we are this natural vet. And we've had a great success rate on our animals. And they're delicious and they're amazing, and I love taking care of them, and they've brought me closer. I get to walk around. People go, oh, that's dirty. When you're walking and you're stirring up the dust of the chicken poop and the stuff like that, that's fixing my immune system. It's making me smarter. It's making me healthier. Again, when we talked about that mycelial network, which is the ground is connected with these underground mushrooms that travel, and they go and they connect all the earth together. And like they found in forest fires, this is amazing, okay? So you have a forest that starts to get in fire, right? What it will do is it will send signals, and then it will literally, so let's say if the fire is moving east to west, what it will do is it will send signals that to the trees and the plants and to the land, because it's through the mushrooms, and it will basically and it will cause these water to flow up into the trees. And so by the time the fire gets to it, the fire goes out because there's too much water in the trees. It will literally flood. How does it do that? Because it's smart. So they found this too, like when a pest is eating on something, the actual plant makes noise, it screams, and then it sends chemical signals, but it's also this mycelial network. So basically its cell phone calls down the row and said, guess what? This thing's coming after us. Start to build up not only an immunity, but build up make yourself taste yucky to it. And what happens is by the time that bug will get to that plant, it doesn't taste good. And then it will stop eating it. And so it does this through this, what's called mycelial network. And awesomely known, which is this mycelial network, when you look at it under the microscope, it is the same thing as a neural network. It's what your brain looks like. So the earth and the plants are a brain, and it will shunt and bring nutrients, minerals to where it's needed. If just like your immune system, when you got an infection or you get poked by, something like that, it will start to swell up, and literally your immune system will go from this part of your body and it will go there. And if soldiers your body will create soldiers. Your thymus will create stuff. This is what the world does. This is what plants do. This is what animals do. It's all communicating. It's this living thing like the Indians talked about. It is a living thing, and it is living intelligence. And what it does is it shares its resources with each other. But see, if you've knocked it out and you've basically killed these little things that are inside there, then it doesn't communicate and it doesn't get what it needs. It doesn't share its, if you don't tell me what you need, then I can't share it with you. And that's what happens. And so if we get this communication through the minerals, through this, it's amazing. And that's the best food that you can have. That is quality food, is ones that are grown that way. And you will notice such a huge difference. And if you really focus on eating foods like this, you will notice you become more intelligent, and it's quick. You'll feel it in your body. You'll feel it in your brain. You will get healthier. You will get stronger. And things will start to open up in your brain, in your gut. And I don't just mean your gut in terms of like the probiotic. I mean like your gut. Your knowing. I know it in my gut. You don't have to learn it. You know it. And the food does this. It's what's called the wisdom of the ancestors. And what's the wisdom? And I'm not talking about channeling the ancestors. I'm just talking about eating the same food literally the same food. And that's where the information comes from. It comes from the earth. It comes from the food. Because what it does is it also unlocks inside our body what's called the epigenetics, which is we have genes that are what they call junk genes that you're not using. And, scientists thought, well, that's just extra stuff. And no, it's not. Just like the appendix is not an extra thing that God, we don't need anymore. No, it's your immune system. The appendix is an organ that was designed to be there, right? It's the same thing, is that this was designed to be there. And so your epigenetics are these things, these little programs that are waiting to turn on, but they have to be fed. And we now understand that it's not the modern technology, and it's not intelligence, and it's not learning a new thing, and it's not a new technology. It's a food. It's a food. And that's why the ancestors were as smart and did figure this and were strong. And so again, we can be the modern ancestors. And it's not even from learning the old ways. It's from eating the old ways. I know this from experience. Eating the older types of foods, eating more biodiversity, but quality food that's grown that way and raised that way and harvested that way and delivered to you that way, fresh that day, right? Not sitting around a shelf. That's the most ideal while the life is still in there. Very quickly, you'll see what I'm talking about. It changes you. It not only makes you healthier, makes your skin look brighter, your brain will open up. Your intuition will open up, your knowingness, your empathy, your connection, everything that you think, your success, your also ability to, don't waste your time on something that is just going to not be good for you anyways. So it even changes your desires, meaning, like Paul says, I don't do what I want to do and I do what I don't want to do. The food, not only your, God and spirituality helps that, but food changes that, because so much of what's unhealthy in us is actually addictions, and you're being driven to do that because of the bugs that you're feeding. You're feeding these things that are inside you that are going more, 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 and they're literally directing you. And so the bad foods feed these things. The unhealthy foods, the factory farm, standard crap junk, it feeds these things that confuse you and make you desire a life that actually is too hard to attain and literally is choking you to death on the way to get there. Many people talk about, how could I fix these things? And well, the food fixes it. Feed it and it will grow. Starve it and it will diminish. So the things that you don't like can all be done. And food is a huge difference. And you got any questions, I can help you with this. But food quality is a huge difference. And you can find it, and it's growing there. And eventually you will have enough energy to start to grow it yourself. I don't care if you live in an apartment. There are these great containers and stuff like that. And you can grow some of your own food. And you can grow your own medicine. And you put your own energy into it, and you put your own love into it, and you literally are putting your body into it, and you can fix yourself and then start to see a new world. And the new world is food. The new world is a connection to this community and to this world that it can't be done for us. You have to do it for yourself. You have to grow it. You have to nurture it. You have to farm it. Till next time, bye-bye.